evening and a very warm welcome for this evening talk. This evening marking the special day, a memorable day of the founder father Brahma Baba, we thought of sharing something inspiring from his own life story. So the topic itself is Brahma Baba. Sorry, just give me a minute. Brahma Baba, a man with a vision and a mission. Okay, so we are celebrating a life of the founding father, Brahma Baba, who was a pioneer in many fields. In particular, was to keep women in front and giving respect to women. He is also a living example and a sample who walked his talk. So today we have from Australia, Brother Charlie with us. Brother Charlie Hogg, the director of the Brahma Kumaris Australia. He has been practicing meditation for over 40 years. And today is my pleasure to invite him, to welcome him and to share on this special topic, who is also very much inspired by the founding father, Brahma Baba. So welcome to Brother Charlie.
Thank you so much, Sister Harika. It's really lovely to be with you. And actually, this topic is something which I think many of our centers around the world will be talking about during January, because the Brahma Kumaris have a tradition of spending January as a special month of meditation. Sometimes we call it the month of love, sometimes the month of remembrance, sometimes the month of power, because we think of Brahma Baba, we remember Brahma Baba and his life as an inspiration to our own spiritual journeys. But I thought I might start off by just telling you a little bit about me and how I came in touch with the Brahma Kumaris and how I developed an understanding of the founding father, Brahma Baba. In fact, I grew up in Melbourne, and I think, like many of you who are listening, I was a searcher from quite a young age. I was always looking for something. And I went to university, I studied architecture, but this feeling of search or looking for some more meaning, perhaps I could say, in life, I took time out and I traveled the world. And I often feel that was really my education, because living in Australia, it's a long way to get out of the country. And so I first went to Southeast Asia. And actually, I traveled overland the whole way to London. It took me almost a year. But without really sort of making a plan, I found wherever I went, I lived in religious communities. So I lived with Sikhs, and Sikhs have the tradition of taking in travelers. I lived with Muslims during Ramadan. I spent a long time in India, and I went to bathe in the Ganges, and I went to where the Dalai Lama lives in the Himalayas. I lived with a guru for a little while. I lived with Buddhist monks in Thailand and so on. And then I went right through the Middle East, and in Europe, I lived in a Christian ashram. So I was on this search, and I settled in London. And as I was searching, I was really interested in spiritual experience. Everywhere you hear nice things, but how do you experience? And when I got to London, I was visiting so many different spiritual places. And I went to the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, and they were advertising two speakers, Daddy Janki and Sister Jenti. And I think most of you know them. Daddy Janki was the head of the Brahma Kumaris till only early last year. And Sister Jenti, who's the director in London. And as soon as I saw them, I felt that they had had some spiritual experience, and it attracted me. And they invited me to the center in London. And when I went, I went to meet them, and they had a picture of Brahma Baba there. the founding father of the Brahma Kumaris. And to be very honest with you, I had a bit of a resistance to gurus. I didn't feel comfortable, even though his face was so kind and so warm, but I did have a little bit of a resistance to gurus. And so I asked Sister Genti about him, and she said that he's not our guru. In fact, his whole life, he spent pointing others towards God. He didn't like people praising him, but he was like an example to all of us. And so I think I began to feel comfortable about him. And as I learned more about him, I learned more about this extraordinary organization, the Brahma Kumaris. Because Brahma Baba was born around 1876. And he was from a village in Sindh, which was India in those days, but is now in Pakistan. And his father was a school teacher. So he lived quite a simple life. And he was brought up as a Hindu. He was a strongly devout Hindu. And he became a businessman, he became a jeweler, and he did extremely well. And when I was in India in the early 1980s, I went to Calcutta. And Brahma Baba, who in those days was known as Dada Lake Raj, he had business in Sindh, in Pakistan, in Hyderabad, but he also had business in other parts of India, but especially in Kolkata. And I went to his shop and I saw where he used to work. And I met many of the other jewelers who were working with him at the time. And it was a really interesting experience for me because I saw a lot of photos and I began to realize that he was a very well-to-do person. He was very socially acceptable. He was living a mainstream life, if you can say. And this was the time of the British Raj. And he was really welcomed into a lot of the Maharajas of India. At that time, there was over 600 mini kingdoms in India, and they were extremely wealthy. At that time, I think in the top 10 sort of richest people in the world, more than half of them were in India. And Brahma Baba's business was serving these people, and he was very well respected and accepted. And he was a very dedicated family man, very devout husband, devoted husband and father. But probably his absolute passion in his life was his love for God and his devotion to God. And he would read the Gita on a daily basis. Not only the Gita, he would read the Granth and various Hindu scriptures, even the Bible, the Quran, everything he had studied in his journey to learn about himself. But he was also at an age which is often known in India as Wanpras, which sort of means a time of retirement where you really seek God. And in the Vedas, it talks about 4 phases for a man in his life. The first is a child. The second is a student. When you study, you don't get married because you're focusing, and it's considered to really be able to concentrate when you study. It's important to not be married at that time. The third phase is bringing up the family. And then the fourth phase is really this Wanpras where you, in a sense, retire, prepare for death, and really engage deeply with your spiritual journey. And Brahma Baba was nearing that time in his life. And yet at the same time, he was really finding a bit of disillusionment, I would say, with all his practices, with religion, I suppose you would say. And he had taken on many gurus because he was on this search to find truth. And one of the gurus was betting on the horses, lost some money, asked him to compensate, help him. He also went up to Kashmir. And for a devout Hindu in their lifetime, They like to visit the 12 main Shiva temples. And there's a beautiful one in Kashmir called Amarnath. And he went there with a lot of feelings of love and devotion. And to a traditional Hindu, they believe that there's an ice Shiva lingam there, a form of Shiva as they see it. And they believe it's permanent, it's created by God. But when he went to the temple, he saw the priest packing up the Shiva lingam before the people began to come. And all these little things started to influence him. And he was losing, I suppose, respect for devotion and looking for something more. And in this point of transformation in his life, he went to Benares, which is the holy city on the Ganges, and he had a vision. Out of the blue, he had this extraordinary vision of a cataclysmic upheaval in the world. He saw war, he saw natural calamities, he saw so much sorrow in the hearts and the minds of humanity. And he was really quite shocked. He had no idea where this came from. It was like it just came out of the blue completely. And he went into a deep introversion after that, just trying to find a context for what he saw. And then a few days later, he had another vision. And that was a vision of like beautiful stars coming out of the sky and entering the bodies of like divine beings, absolutely spiritual beings. These stars just like souls entering the forehead of these divine beings. And just as the first vision was just in a sense shocking for him, in a sense, the second vision was absolutely magnificent and beautiful and inspiring. And yet still he was wondering what was really going on. He was not clear as to the meaning of these visions. And so he began to meditate a lot, but he changed dramatically in his life. He stopped worshiping, he stopped reading scriptures, he stopped going to the gurus, and he even let go his business, which people around him were amazed because he had built up the business his whole life. But it seemed like now something was much more important for him than making money. And he said to his business partner, you take whatever you want. You know, I've found God. I've found what I've been looking for. And so he began to really go deeply into meditation. And as he was doing this, people who saw him sometimes would have visions. They would have visions of light, or sometimes they would have, you know, visions of a golden age, similar to what he had seen in his vision. And he began to feel another power working through him. He felt that he was like an instrument for some other power that was beginning to work through him, the power of the divine, the power of the supreme. And so Brahma Baba, who was a businessman, Brahma Baba, who was a family man, Brahma Baba, who was a devotee, began to completely transform. His whole life completely changed. And a small group of people began to gather, and he became a teacher. Or I should probably say teaching started to come through him. And as this small community grew, many, when they were in the gathering, would go into a trance or have visions. And he began to teach. And the teachings that came through, and he always felt he was an instrument, that he was just an instrument for God, that God was using him to pass on these teachings. And the first teaching that really came through was that, you know, you are a soul. And he's very clearly defined the soul as just a point of life energy. The soul sits in the front of the brain in the center of the forehead. And the soul is the whole life force in this physical body. And he began to teach how originally we were soul conscious. But as we forgot that I am the eternal, immortal, non-physical soul, and I started to think I'm a temporary, mortal, physical body, we started to move into a completely different consciousness. It's like it gave birth to two states of mind, so to speak. First is the consciousness of arrogance, we could say, the I of arrogance. And when the I of arrogance is ruling inside of me, I compare with others. I think I am better, I know more, I am right. And when it really comes into my feelings, that's when I start to easily feel insulted, disrespected, not valued, excluded, sensitive. All these feelings are when I move away from my original consciousness of the self as the soul, and I take on the mantle of body consciousness. So that was one state of consciousness. The other is perhaps the I of inferiority, the I of lack of self-respect. When I also compare with others, but I feel always others are better, others know more, others don't love me, others don't value me. And when that really comes into my feelings, that's when I feel really hopeless about myself, inadequate, inferior, depressed, and all these sorts of feelings. So he began to explain how when we leave soul consciousness and we come into body consciousness, we go through these massive mood fluctuations. And then he also described the Supreme Soul or God as a soul that never takes birth and rebirth. We human souls take birth and rebirth, and we reap the fruit of our actions, but there's one soul that retains truth, one soul that remains pure. And really the aim of Raja Yoga is to know the self and link the mind with the divine. And so he began to teach these things and people began to relate to them. But he also began to teach that time is like cyclic. We move in cycles, and that we're at the end of a cycle. And this is where his visions came from, that we're at the end of an old era based on body consciousness, hence the huge upheaval, but the beginning of a new era based on soul consciousness of a new age. And this was really Brahma Baba's vision and mission in his life, that he felt that when we change, the world will change. When human souls let go the ego of body consciousness, that we can step back into our elevated soul conscious state and become those divine beings that used to live on this world, in this world, and will live again in this world. And all the teachings that were coming through him was saying that this is like a confluence of this culture based on body consciousness, the influence of the supreme, the influence of the divine, and we move into this culture of the golden age based on soul consciousness. So you could imagine he went through this huge transformation, and it had a dramatic effect on the community around him. And in the mid-1930s, I think you could imagine that the community was very simple, quite poor, very devotional, quite religious, and especially the attitude to women. As Harika Ben was saying right at the beginning of this little session, that, the Brahma Kumaris is an extraordinary story really about, I suppose, the role of women, because right from the beginning, Brahma Baba gave that regard to women. And in those days, in that society, you may have read the story of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was betrothed as a child to his wife, and they were living together when they were 12 and 13 years old. And that wasn't uncommon in those days. Many girls were betrothed at birth. Their families would arrange a marriage, and they would be married and produce children. And really their Their life was to support their husband. And Brahma Baba really had a vision, and he would say that women were the gateway to heaven. And he would say this purposefully because in some of the traditional teachings, it was felt that women were the opposite and often treated as second-class citizens in the society. And so he really, right from the beginning of this organization, saw an incredible role for women, and he set up a trust of 12 mothers, and he actually gave his wealth to this trust. That's how much he trusted these women. And I think it's an incredible story because now, from that simple beginning, the Brahma Kumaris is the largest spiritual organization in the world run by women. And once I was in New York, because the Brahma Kumaris is a non-government member of the United Nations, and I met one of the Under-Secretary Generals of the United Nations, and he said that he believed the Brahma Kumaris was the largest spiritual group in any denomination, any different traditions run by women. And you could imagine that that was it had huge significance in India after centuries of tradition of the male guru, where really in many parts of that country, women weren't even allowed to attend religious gatherings. And even if they did, they had to attend behind a screen. And I think it really came home to me very strongly once when I was in Surat in Gujarat. And I went to a conference organized by the president of India, Abdul Kalam. And he had brought together all the religious leaders of India. This is maybe 12 years ago. And so they were Hindu leaders, Muslim leaders, Christian leaders, Jewish leaders, Sikh leaders, Parsi leaders. They were all there. And they'd set it up in a beautiful Jain temple, and they sat in the round, and he was sitting at the head. And the only women in that circle were the Brahma Kumaris. And that really dawned on me, in a way, how radical Brahma Baba was, his vision that women will be the leaders taking us into the future. And I've personally found, many times people ask me, because obviously I know I'm a male, and people ask me, well, how do you feel about it? But I find that his vision has created a very family feeling. And rather than a hierarchy, women tend to work together in collaboration, in inclusivity. And it creates a really beautiful atmosphere in the organization. And so from these beginnings, they began in Hyderabad, which, as I said, is sort of in what is now Pakistan. And there was some upheaval there, and they moved to Karachi. And about 3 years ago, I went to Karachi, and I spent a few days there visiting all the original buildings of the Brahma Kumaris. It was such a simple beginning. But they had a magnificent house, I would say, called Kunch Bhavan, where about 200 sisters would stay. Brahma Baba didn't stay there. He lived close by. But this is really for 14 years. The sisters stayed there, and a lot of them were young women that became the leaders of this organization, known as the Dadis, or the elder sisters. And they had this incredible education. They went to school in the morning, but they had this extraordinary education in soul consciousness. It's like they grew. And Brahma Baba's vision was that these girls would become spiritual leaders, because in that soul conscious state, they saw everyone as an equal. They saw beyond gender, they saw beyond culture, they saw beyond religion. And so he wanted to create that soul conscious atmosphere and to break down their body consciousness. He would get them to do often the jobs of men. He would get them to do building, and he would get them to fix cars and things like that. And you'd get the boys to do cooking and things like that, to break down this consciousness that I'm just a body and the gender of the body, and really to become more soul conscious and go beyond those sorts of things. And they had a daily schedule. And to really grow spiritually, Brahma Baba set up this whole organization like a spiritual university, in a way where we study to transform the self at such a deep level. Because his vision was we can only have a new world when we change. And really, when I look at the world at the moment, we all can see what is happening in the world. Why? To me, what we see out there is just an expression of our collective mind. When the human mind is full of greed, we create this materialistic culture that's destroying our environment. When the human mind is full of ego, we have no we're all into self-interest. We have no compassion for the other. When the human mind, the collective human mind, is full of anger, we have the conflict we see in our world at the moment. And so Brahma Baba felt that when we really change at the seed level, that is really what will change the world around us. And so they would meditate on a daily basis. They'd wake up early in the morning, meditate, have spiritual classes. But he actually taught them to, as they moved around their life, to keep a connection with God. As he would say, to remember the Supreme Soul, the image of light, the one who is an ocean of peace, an ocean of love, an ocean of power, an ocean of happiness. And so he would say that when you remember, three things happen. First, you connect. Second, you're influenced by whatever you connect with. And thirdly, you have a feeling inside. So if I remember the past, or if I remember other people, if I get on well with them, I'm influenced by that and I feel good inside. But if I'm having conflict, the millisecond my mind touches that thought, I'm influenced by that conflict and I have peacelessness. And so he would say, as I go about the day, if the mind keeps connecting to the past, connecting to people, connecting to behaviors, I would fluctuate. And he would encourage them to go around, become soul conscious and connect with God. And what he would call karma yogis, that was really to be yogis in action, to live a life, even live at home with the family, and go about all the chores of your life, but keep connected with one. And so Brahma Baba became an extraordinary example, because I think the main way we learn is not so much by, yes, the teachings are one thing, but by example. When we see the example of someone in front of us, that's when we can really see, well, this is where I have to go. And he was the embodiment of love. And in a way, he became an instrument of the Supreme Soul's love. And he would show so much love that, in a way, that love pulled people out of their sadness and their sorrow. And so many times I met people who, one person was telling me his mother was coming to the centers and he went to meet Brahma Baba, and he really didn't agree with a lot of the teachings. He was a professor of philosophy, and he argued a lot with Brahma Baba. And yet when he was leaving after a few days of disagreement and argument, he said, Brahma Baba said goodbye with his eyes were just completely radiating love. And he thought, this is unique. This is something different. I argued, I was critical, I was this, I was that. And yet there's this complete love that's coming back to me. He was also completely humble. It was never I. It was always that I'm an instrument of God. This is God's work. I'm just an instrument of God. And he even did simple chores around the organization, even helping the mothers with their children and things like this too. And he was also completely committed to truth. And if anyone was absolutely honest, no matter what happened, he would give them so much love. He encouraged honesty. Sometimes he would get them all to meet each other in the evening. They'd meet as a whole group, and he would get them to share, and he encouraged them to be absolutely honest if they've made a mistake, if something didn't go well. And so he tried to bring out this honesty. And all of this time, he felt he was learning. He was a student too. He remained that humble. I'm also learning. I'm also transforming. And he would be very open when he would try to keep his mind with God as he did things. And when his mind would wander, he would share with everyone so that they could also learn from him. But in the early 1950s, and a little bit of a history lesson, I'm going to not go on for too much longer, but there was partition. As you know, there was the British were leaving India, and they divided India really into three countries, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. And that was a time of massive upheaval. Some say up to 4 million people died. And so this was an organization that had been 14 years in this house in Karachi. And though they weren't harmed, even though there was so much upheaval between the Hindus and the Muslims, but they decided to move to India. And I went to the port in Karachi, where they took a boat to the coastline in Gujarat, and they took a train up to Mount Abu. Until this day, the Brahma Kumaris have their headquarters in Mount Abu. And I would say that if you haven't been there, try to get there at some point. It's hard to travel these days, but it's a unique place in the world. The atmosphere is something which is incredibly special. And at that point in the early 1950s, they began. Brahma Baba had really, in a sense, trained a lot of these girls. They'd become really experienced teachers, and he sent them to all corners of India. And they began centers. They had very little money, but they had a lot of love and a lot of, in a sense, purity, I would say. And now there's something like 35,000 places where the Brahma Kumaris teach from in India. There's about 8,000 official centers, but 35,000 places in little villages everywhere. And they're just offering this teaching. So this vision of one man to make a better world by us changing ourselves reached all over India. And then in the 18th of January in 1969, when Brahma Baba, after 32 years as an extraordinary student and teacher himself, one night he took evening class. He would every morning speak to the gathering, speak knowledge, and in the evenings also. And on this evening, he went into the main hall in Mount Abu, and he delivered the class. He went to the door. He would always say goodbye from the door. He went to his room, only about 20 meters away. He lay down on his bed, and Daddy Prakashmani, one of the original sisters, was there. And she followed him into the room. He lay down, and he held her hand, and she could feel he was looking at her. And Baba often used to look at the soul through the eyes, the soul meeting the soul, and pass that spiritual power through his eyes. And he was looking at her, and then she could feel the energy going from his hand. And he left his body. He left his body at that time. And he left this incredible vibration, we can say, of love for God and love for self-transformation. And those who are a part of the organization wondered, well, what's going to happen now? The founding father's gone. And yet, 3 days later, the tradition in the Brahma Kumaris is a lot of the sisters would go into trance and they would receive messages from the divine through trance. And one of the special ones, Dadi Gulzar, another sister, original sister, she went into trance, and then the souls of the Supreme and Brahma Baba started to teach again through this, shall we say, through the medium of Dadi Gulzar. And even Brahma Baba told this extraordinary experience of him leaving his body, how he had the pull of the love of the children, but the pull of going beyond, shall we say, the consciousness of the body completely, settling all his karmic account. And in a sense, our understanding is he became like an angel. In a way, he's still there serving the world, but in a subtle way. And so an absolutely extraordinary individual who, in a sense, led an ordinary life. But because of his love for God, he became extraordinary, and he conquered all his past, his weakness, and became like an angel. And this is really the amazing story of Brahma Baba. And he doesn't want us to worship him. He doesn't want us to put his picture everywhere, but he wants his life to be an inspiration for us to follow and have our own connection with God. And so this is really the seed of this organization, the seed of the Brahma Kumaris. So I think I should probably wind up there. I've been going for quite a time, and come back to Sister Harika, and maybe there's a little bit of chit chat we can have for a few moments.
I think it's really incredible, and so much love I could already feel whilst you're sharing the story of the brother who felt the love from his eyes. And I can carry on listening while you're sharing the story. It's very nice and powerful. But I got some questions here. Could you please clarify about between both vision and a mission?
Yeah. In a sense, the vision is really to create a new world. That was his vision. And right from the beginning, when I said he had a vision of these divine beings living in a golden age, and in all the ancient cultures of the world, they do remember a time when human beings, like a golden period of history, where human beings lived with love and non-violence, and they were pure. The mission was really to reach that place. And the mission was really, in a sense, he realized that until there was enough individuals that could, in a sense, transform themselves, because we are body conscious. We've forgotten who we are, and all human souls are body conscious. So his mission was to educate us, re-educate us in this lifelong learning of becoming soul conscious. And Harika Ben, I went to university, and when I was there, I often thought I learned so much information. I knew so much about so many things. But this education, it's like you have one idea: who am I? And Brahma Baba, his mission was to take us deeper and deeper and deeper, so that rather than just knowing that and believing it, many people believe that they're a soul or a spirit, to absolutely experience soul consciousness, which is the experience of true inner peace, my original state, which is also the experience of benevolence for all beings, where I begin to transform myself. So in a sense, his mission was to train many to become soul conscious, who would go out and make others soul conscious. And in a sense, there's like the Brahma Kumaris, I think, are in 120 plus countries of the world. And one thing I love about this organization is that people from all religious traditions come together in a soul conscious way. And so I know in Sydney, at one point in our center, we had like 6 sisters living. I think One was Hindu, one was Christian, one was Jewish, one was Buddhist, one was Muslim. Maybe that's 5. But, we were all living together. And I think that's such a beautiful message for our world, that we are actually souls and we are one family.
That's beautiful. That's very nice. So how much of his vision has been accomplished? I think from the time he passed away on 18th January 1969.
Well, he always said that people would come together. And what he said was that the souls who had lived in the golden age, the soul takes birth and rebirth through the golden age and the silver age. And then the search begins in the copper age and into the iron age, that these souls will realize that this is the time to become soul conscious. But he always said that there would be a limited number, maybe around 900,000 to 1 million, that would come and start to transform themselves. And this is happening. As I said, all over the world, people are going through this deep transformation process, because he would always say we can only begin a new world when people become new, when we clean our inner world, clean our memory track, clean our karmic story, and in a sense, renew ourselves spiritually through knowing who I am and connecting my mind to God.
Okay, that's amazing. And one more question is, what do you think, how would he feel seeing the world today?
I think Brahma Baba realized that time moves in cycles. And excuse my throat. I live in Australia, and the Indigenous people of Australia, the Aboriginal people, they believe in cyclic time. Most of the ancient cultures of the world. So Brahma Baba realized that, as the soul becomes body conscious, we lose our power. And when we lose our power, we only seek happiness externally through temporary things, through material things, through other people. And unfortunately, as we know, people are so unhappy at the moment. So I think Brahma Baba could see that the human souls were losing their power quickly. And the more we lose our power, then become body conscious, it creates this atmosphere we see in the world at the moment. Sometimes I think it's like there's 8 billion human souls in the world. It's like, and 8 billion souls are pumping out thoughts into the atmosphere. It's like a thought soup. We're living in this thought soup. And there's this vibrations of anger and hurt and fear and anxiety and depression. And really what is happening is that if we don't have a spiritual practice, if I'm not caring for my mind, I absorb this atmosphere of the world. And Brahma Baba knew that it would reach an extreme, which we see at the moment. And unfortunately, there will be an upheaval, but in a way, that upheaval is going to give way to a peaceful world. And so it's like time keeps moving in a cycle, gold and silver, copper, iron, but back to golden once again. And so that was he realized that it will reach an extreme, but the seeds of soul consciousness have been sown, and they will be the seeds of a future society of love, of peace, of happiness, of respect, which really all human souls want.
That's really, really nice. And it's like reinforcing and reaffirming that it's okay, everything will be going to be good. Everything is going to be getting better. Because with the time where we are now, everybody's getting so disappointed and hopeless. So, which is a good message to share across.
That's so true. And Brahma Baba used to say there's benefit in everything. And you know how sometimes in life things go really badly, terrible things seem to happen, but you know how sometimes later on you realize that there's sometimes some benefit. And he used to say that really we can never die. The great fear of the human soul is that I will cease to exist. But Brahma Baba taught the depth of soul consciousness. I am an eternal, immortal being. I enter this body in the womb when the quickening begins. I act through this body, and at some point I'm going to leave this body. The more I become soul conscious, I realize that death is just a creation of a false state of consciousness. And really, the beings of the Golden Age don't even have a concept of death. They understood the continuity of life. And so we really begin to learn we're going through this dramatic period of change. And of course, people are suffering, and we have so much compassion and mercy. But actually, the more I learn about myself and the more I learn to remember God, I can help heal my own pain, and I can help others around me too. And this is why Brahma Baba, when he set up this university, he had 4 subjects and used to say, study spiritual knowledge daily, meditate, remember God regularly, constantly, as much as possible, imbibe virtues, but give to others. And even if that means that as I go about my day, that I just give love through my face, or I give benevolent feelings through my eyes, or I give compassion through my vibrations. Really, I think the most beautiful life that Brahma Baba used to teach is to remember God, and give to others. And this is really, I think, a beautiful life at this moment, because on one hand, people have everything materially, but on the other hand, they're bankrupt spiritually. And I think a lot of people realize that there's an emptiness inside, there's a vacuum. And so what Brahma Baba said was, try to help everyone in some way. And that really means by just becoming an example yourself of benevolence, not judgment, but benevolence for those around me. And this is really the Brahma Kumaris University. I find there's love for God and love for all humanity. Whether they agree with these teachings or not, it doesn't matter. But they're our brothers and sisters, and we're here to support everyone through this incredibly challenging time that we're all facing at the moment.
Thank you. One last question, personally to you. What are the 3 qualities that you really admire and that you really want to take from Brahma Baba? I know there are so many qualities you already mentioned whilst you're sharing the talk, but what is that you really take it?
I think the first one is courage, because sometimes on this journey of learning about the self, we come across weaknesses in ourselves, shortcomings. Sometimes we make mistakes, sometimes we fail at things. And I think his life, it gave me so much hope and courage to keep going. That the highest destination is to learn about the self and transform the self. So much courage. The second is benevolence. I love the way he had benevolent feelings for even those who were against him, even those who opposed him, even those who defamed him. He never would return with the same feelings. In fact, he would show so much benevolence. But probably the main thing I've learned from Brahma Baba is how to love God. And that if you love God, it can take you beyond everything, every problem, every issue. And it's not a religious love, it's a natural relationship. He was just like, he saw God as the supreme soul, the supreme being, as his lover, and had this real sense of relationship. And that's really inspired me as a person. I feel my whole life, this life for me has been a life of love. I can say that the more my heart fills with love, the stronger I feel, and the more I have that strength to face whatever comes my way. And I really learned that from Brahma Baba. The more you love God, the more inner strength and power you receive.
Thank you. I can carry on continuing asking questions and enjoy listening to your sharing, but I wanted to ask one more last question before we go on to meditation is, you haven't seen Brahma Baba in a physical level, right? But it seems like you already had a lot of bond and connection with this special soul, I could say that. Um, what do you feel in terms of your relationship with Brahma Baba?
Yeah, it's really interesting that I feel incredibly close to Brahma Baba. In a way, I can say I have a relationship with God, whom we call Shiv Baba, the Supreme Soul. And in a sense, I feel that relationship makes me pure. But the relationship with Brahma Baba helps me, gives me the courage to face myself, be honest with myself, learn about myself, and transform myself. And I really do feel that he had to face so many things, but he did it. And so that's where I think, I do feel close to him as well. And I feel that both these connections have helped me grow spiritually, because Shiv Baba, in a sense, gives the theory, but Brahma Baba had to live in this world like me and face all the issues that all of us have to face in life today. And so his life was an incredible inspiration. But as I said, he's not my guru, but someone who's inspired me to try to improve myself.
Thank you very much, Brother Charlie. It's really inspiring and so much love-filled sharing and very honest and open. Would you like to take us into a short meditation, please?
So I would like to thank you too, Harika Ben. It's been lovely to chat with you. Thank you. And yes, I'd just like to invite everyone to just enjoy a few moments of meditation. And if I can suggest to put down devices and for these few moments, really focus internally. Brahma Baba posed two questions to himself. And these two questions were the basis of him reaching the highest stage of spirituality. The first was, who am I? Visualize yourself as the minute spark of life energy residing in the front of the brain, in the center of the forehead. I have lived before this body, and I will continue after this body. The deeper I go into knowing and experiencing who I am, I reconnect with my original self, a being who's completely loving, a being who remains totally peaceful, and a being who is full of benevolence. And the second question, who do I belong to? There's only one relationship that's permanent, and that's my relationship with God. All other relationships are temporary. We search for true love. We invest our hearts in relationships. But whether through change, whether through time, whether through conflict, those relationships change. There's one relationship that's permanent, and that's I, the soul, connecting with the divine, with the supreme. A soul like me, a radiant jewel of light. If I follow Brahma Baba and practice this self-realization and explore this loving relationship with the divine, I too can have a vision of my true self, a happy and peaceful being, and become that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Even with the time difference, you could be able to join us and share the inspirations and the real story of Brahma Baba. And what I have taken from this is courage, love for God, and honesty, and knowing yourself more. I think that these are the key things. I think based on knowing yourself, Brahma Baba has to go through all the process, all the journey. So thank you very much, and for this wonderful evening. And next week, same time, same day, we have topic is harmonizing personalities with Sister Maureen. Thank you. Have a good evening, and Om Shanti.